Welcome back to Hermetic Perspective. This video is going to be part one of my series on the Republic. We're moving on from the Phaedo, we're going to the Republic. I think it's going to be pretty good. I've been excited for it. We're going to be using, of course, the dialogue itself, got here, as well as Proclus's commentary on it. So this video is going to be only covering book one. I'm going to try to keep these videos a little shorter than before. And yeah, let's get into it. The Republic is a dialogue about justice, obviously. But it goes deeper than that. It's about the principle of justice as opposed to the real-world manifestations of justice. Now you might say, there are a ton of sections in the Republic about the writing of constitutions, the arrangement of cities. Aren't these the physical manifestations of justice? Well, yes, of course. But as opposed to most Platonists today who interpret these sections as literal, I'm going to be going in with a more Neoplatonic understanding of the dialogue, according to which these sections are simply metaphorical representations of the inner processes of the soul and the way in which justice interacts with the soul. Now, the first book of the Republic is more of an introduction than a real exposition of Platonic thought. It's what's known as an aporia, which is essentially a Platonic dialogue which has no real conclusion, no final agreement to the argument. The participants are left without closure. That's why it's more of an introduction. It's introducing the idea of justice and what it's not. So Socrates takes on three successive debaters in this part of the dialogue, and they give their definition of justice, and Socrates essentially just tells them why it's wrong. We begin with Cephalus, who is an old man, and he offers Socrates a definition of justice which essentially just boils down to being honest and repaying your debts. Now, that's a good way to go about life, but it's not really a definition of justice. And to show this point, Socrates gives the hypothetical of borrowing a weapon from a friend, and then the friend subsequently goes mad. Now, would it be just to give the friend this weapon back? You owe it to him, and you do have to repay your debt, according to Cephalus's definition. But this man might hurt himself, he might hurt others with this weapon that you're giving back to him, now that he's gone mad. So it's really not just to give it back to him. And that's essentially all that Cephalus's argument is. It's a good outlook on life, but it's not really a definition of justice because it doesn't account for the complexities of what justice can be in real-world scenarios. Now, the next debater is Polymarchus, who is Cephalus's son. And he refines Cephalus's definition and says, benefiting one's friends and harming one's enemies is justice. Socrates refutes this definition with a simple line of reasoning. Firstly, harming a horse makes that horse worse in what makes a horse virtuous, probably riding ability or something like that. The same is true for a dog whose hunting skills would be degraded by harming it physically. If a dog has a broken leg, it can't hunt effectively. The same must then hold true for humans. The human virtue is justice. So it follows that harming humans will make them more unjust, worse at the human virtue. Socrates then says that you cannot use music to make people unmusical, nor horsemanship to make people unhorsemanlike. Therefore, you cannot use justice to make somebody unjust. Therefore, harming your enemy cannot be justice, as justice cannot make somebody more unjust, which harming them, according to Polymarchus's definition, would do. And with that, another definition has been shot down, and our third challenger comes in. Thrasymachus is the third debater, and his definition of justice is nothing other than what is advantageous for the stronger. He's a more aggressive challenger, and he seems to be genuinely upset at what he feels is Socrates' grandstanding. His argument is essentially that when zooming out, we can see that in cities, justice is simply the rule of the governing body for their own benefit, and when the lower classes obey these rules, that's what justice is. He sees justice not as a Platonic form with its own essence, but instead as a term used to describe the state of affairs, in this case, governance. Socrates' first refutation of this argument is pretty simple. He says, rulers of cities sometimes make mistakes and do things that are disadvantageous for themselves. If the lower classes then obey these erroneous laws, they are doing something that is disadvantageous for the ruler. Yet, by Thrasymachus' definition, this would still be considered justice. What he's essentially saying is that if a ruler makes a law that is not helpful to himself, and the peasants obey that law, they are doing harm to the ruler, be it without their knowledge. But by Thrasymachus' definition, this is still going to be justice. And that's where the contradiction comes in. Now, at this point, after that refutation, Thrasymachus shifts the argument away from the definition of justice and instead wants to debate the value of living a just life versus an unjust life. Now, in Proclus's third essay of his commentary on the Republic, he breaks down Thrasymachus's argument here into 4 points. 1. Injustice is virtue and good judgment, while justice is naivety. 2. Injustice is stronger than justice. 3. The unjust person is happy and blessed. And 4. Injustice is more profitable than justice. Now, Socrates answers the first point like this. The just person does not seek to do better than another just person, but he does seek to do better than an unjust person. An unjust person seeks to do better than both the just and unjust person. Neither a doctor nor a musician seeks to do better than other doctors or musicians, but he does seek to do better than non-doctors and non-musicians. A knowledgeable person does not try to take more for himself from other knowledgeable people, but he does from the unknowledgeable. A knowledgeable person is wise. A wise person is good. The unjust person behaves not like the knowledgeable person, but as the ignorant one, as he seeks to take from both those like himself and those unlike himself. Therefore, the unjust person cannot be virtuous or good, but instead the just person is both virtuous and has good judgment. I will say, I do have some problems with this argument, especially with the third point. I don't think it can be taken as a given that doctors and musicians don't compete among each other, or want to take success from their peers for themselves. In fact, I think these are some of the most cutthroat professions there are. Nevertheless, this is Socrates' answer to the first point. On the second point, which is about injustice being stronger than justice, Socrates answers with a simple truth. This is that a collection of unjust people, be they a band of thieves or a city full of the unjust, will not get far in any conquest or mission if they are turning this injustice inward on each other. Injustice creates quarrels, it creates factions, and it stops a group from taking collective action towards a specific goal. So, for these groups to be successful, they will at least have to be just to others in the group of unjust people. This means that for injustice to do anything, justice must be present in some way. Now, something that requires something else to exist, in this case, injustice requiring justice to exist, cannot be stronger than it, because if it can't exist without it, how could it be stronger? Proclus extends this reasoning beyond the group of bandits or the city onto the soul itself. He explains that all souls contain some degree of both justice and injustice. Of course, except for the perfect souls which have already undergone gnosis and reunited with the One. These ones are completely just. But for us here, we all contain some degree of each thing. He states, the presence of injustice within a single person necessitates that he is filled with factional strife in relation to himself. In other words, there's always going to be some amount of discord going on in your soul between these two opposing forces. He also explains that in the soul, justice is reason and injustice is passion. So you can think about what's going on in the soul as a battle between reason and passion. Now, just like there's discord within the group of bandits, in your soul there's also going to be a quarrel going on between these two forces. And just as the group of bandits becomes ineffective because of this quarrel, so will your soul as injustice increases. Now, if there were to be a soul where injustice completely enslaved reason, or even if it wiped out reason, that soul would no longer be a soul, because what is the function of a soul? It's to live and to do things. That's what it's for. And if you only have passion, only have injustice in your soul, you're not going to be able to take any kind of action, because action requires some level of reason or logic to think about why you're doing something and what you need to do to reach a certain goal. So if your soul has no trace of justice, no trace of reason, no trace of logic, you're not even going to be able to think about why you need to get out of your bed to walk over and do something. You're going to be completely inactive, and at that point it's no longer a soul, it's just a husk. So we see again that injustice cannot exist without justice. However, justice can exist without injustice. And that proves once again that in the soul, as well as in the real world, justice is more powerful than injustice. On the third point, that being the unjust person is happy and blessed, Socrates answers like this. Firstly, all things have a function and a virtue. The function of the pruning knife is to prune vines, while its virtue is its sharpness. If deprived of its virtue, and instead given its vice, which would be dullness, the knife will not be able to do its function well. Essentially, the function is what something does, and the virtue is the attribute by which it does it. So then, the function of a soul is to live, the virtue of a soul is justice, and its vice injustice. Therefore, a soul governed by its vice, injustice, cannot live well. Therefore, the unjust are not blessed and happy, but instead the opposite. Well, the just are in fact living well and are blessed. Now, the biggest point of contention with this argument is going to be the part about justice being the virtue of the soul, because not a lot of proof is given for that, and you could see it being other things. It could be something like happiness or something like that. Proclus in his essay, he doesn't give a great argument about why justice is the virtue of the soul, and that might be because part of the essay is lost, and a lot of people think that he was going to reinforce this argument more, or he did reinforce this argument more in the essay, but that part has just been lost to us. What he says is essentially that it can be shown that people who are more just have a better life and live more well, and they're correlated, so the more justice that you have in supply, the better a life you'll live, so it must be the virtue. I don't know if it's the best argument, but that's what he gives, and that's Socrates' logic for refuting the third point. And on the final point about injustice being more profitable than justice, Socrates simply says that to be happy instead of wretched is to be profitable. He basically makes the case that material wealth is not the real measure of profitability. It's really not much of an argument either, and I think that's because this dialogue was meant to end in confusion, and that's what it does. After he makes this point, that's where it ends. Thrasymachus leaves, and that's all we get. He hasn't offered up his counter-argument for what justice is, and that's what he does in Book 2. So I wanted to keep these videos shorter, so Book 2 is going to be the next video. I already have it written out, so I just have to film it and such, but I think that's going to be a really interesting video. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching. And yeah, stay tuned because this is going to end up being a pretty long series. I think I'm going to go book by book, and maybe even some will need 2 parts. So it's going to be ongoing for a while, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope you'll tune in, and thank you.